Hello, this is Doris Ann Mertz, and welcome to part 5 of ACT English Prep. We're going to talk a little bit about prepositions and modifiers. Okay, prepositions. Prepositional phrase is a small group of words that begins with a preposition and it ends with a noun or a pronoun. And you got to be sure to use an objective case pronoun after a preposition. And the objective case pronouns are ones like me, him, her. So these are some examples. John bought an ice cream for me. You would never mess up and say John bought an ice cream for I. But for some reason, when we add more than one in the object of the sentence, we end up wanting to use I. We'll say John bought an ice cream for Jill and I, but that is incorrect. It's John bought an ice cream for Jill and me. You just got to take out the other object and see what works, me or I. So I is a subjective case pronoun and me is objective case pronoun always. All right. You're going to be tested a little bit on prepositional idioms on the ACT. And these are ones that you're probably going to get right. They give a lot of trouble to students that English is not their first language. They have a lot of trouble with these, but I'm hoping you'll get these right. Some examples of prepositional idioms are listed on the screen, like take care of. We use take care of, not take care in, take care from. We say take care of. We say according to. We say out of season. We say out of the blue. These are things that you're probably going to get right just because you're used to using the English language. So we're not going to spend a lot of time on those. But here's just an example of a type of question that you might see that tests on prepositional idiom. She pointed to a corner of the yard where a tortoise was calmly munching a dandelion. Rosie must have heard us talking because she began to amble over to us. So must have heard us talking. Is that correct? Sounds pretty good to me, but let's look at the other choices. She must have heard of us talking. That means something different. That means she heard about us talking. So, which is the second option there. And this one tests whether you would know to use have or of, but it's must have heard us talking, not must of. Even though when we say it, it sounds like must of, it's actually must have heard us talking. So F, no change is the answer. All right, we're going to talk a little bit about modifiers, adjectives and adverbs. Adjectives describe nouns and pronouns. They can also identify which one, like this one, that one, those ones, or quantify, such as several, five, many. Adverbs, they describe verbs, they describe adjectives, and they describe other adverbs or entire clauses. And if it ends in an ly, it's an adverb always. So here's an important thing that they'll test you on the ACT, just for clarity in your writing. They want you to place modifiers as close to the words they describe as possible. So instead of saying the wagon that is blue is mine, which is kind of complicating things, just say the blue wagon is mine. Here's some examples of how they would test you on putting the modifier closest to what it's modifying. So behind the curtain, my doctor told me to put on a gown. So it sounds like the doctor's behind the curtain in this sentence. So it'd be more correct to say, my doctor told me to put on a gown behind the curtain. Here's another incorrect one. Worn and tattered, Uncle Joe took down the flag. Since worn and tattered is closest to Uncle Joe, you think it's describing him, but it's actually meaning to describe the flag. So you would say, Uncle Joe took down the flag, which was worn and tattered, or Uncle Joe took down the worn and tattered flag. All right, here's another example. While making breakfast, the smoke alarm went off and woke the baby. It sounds like the smoke alarm is making breakfast. So you would fix that by choosing something like, while I was making breakfast, the smoke alarm went off and woke the baby, or the smoke alarm went off and woke the baby while I was making breakfast. So make sure it's as close to what it's modifying as possible. All right, here's some troublemakers we have. Sometimes you don't know whether to use fewer or less, and the ACT might test on that. So you use fewer if it can be counted, less if it can't. You'd say use fewer eggs this time because eggs can be counted. But you'd say use less salt this time because salt cannot be counted. Similarly, you use number if it can be counted and use amount if it can't. So the number of pounds of food wasted in the cafeteria each day is appalling because you can count pounds. But if you didn't say pounds there, if you just said food, you can't really count food. So you'd say the amount of food wasted in the cafeteria each day is horrible. Here's some more troublemakers. Sometimes we use good when we should use well. Good is an adjective, well is an adverb. So when we're talking about how we feel or how something does something, when it's modifying a verb, we need to be sure to use well. I had a good time. Good is correct here because we're talking about time, which is a noun, and did very well for a beginner. You wouldn't say I did very good for a beginner. You should say I did very well for a beginner. Okay, bad and badly. Badly ends in ly. We learned that those are always adverbs. Bad is an adjective, badly is an adverb. We feel badly for Johnny. This is how we feel, which is a verb, because he had a bad cold. A cold is a noun. He had a bad cold, so you'd use bad cold, bad for that. All right, let's review a little bit. I have a large number or amount of tickets to sell. Can we count tickets? Yes, we can. So let's use number. There are less or fewer people outside now. Can we count the people? We can. So since we can count them, we would use fewer instead of less. How good or well did you perform on the ACT? It's talking about how you performed, which is a verb. So it's how well did you perform on the ACT? Amanda feels bad or badly since she burnt her fingers. It feels badly because we're talking about how she feels. Forgot my period there. All right, comparisons. We're going to talk about creating the comparative form. Comparative forms when you're comparing two things. So you either add ER to the modifier or you use the word more or less before the modifier. Similarly, when you're creating a superlative form, you add EST to the modifier or use most or least. So this is the stuff like she is prettier than he is or something like that. But if you're talking about she is the prettiest girl in the class, prettier than everyone else, she's the prettiest girl. So in general, you add ER or EST to short modifiers that are just one or two syllables, such as dirtier, prettier. There are some exceptions, and you'll just have to kind of know these by ear, like you would say more often instead of oftener, which sounds kind of awkward to say oftener. So it's more often. And actually, even some short words like fun, you'd say more fun. I'm having more fun than I've ever had instead of I'm having funner. This is funner than anything I've ever done. It's more fun than anything I've ever done. So you use more or less you always use more or less if the modifier has more than two syllables. Otherwise, it just sounds really awkward. All right, let's review. This is the most friendly or the friendliest town in America. You can actually use friendliest here. It also sounds okay to use most friendly, but friendliest is a good word because it's only a two-syllable word, friendliest. So I've heard more ridiculous or ridiculouser things before. So ridiculouser just sounds ridiculous. So we know it's more ridiculous because this is a long word. It's more than two syllables. So we always use more or most when there's more than two syllables. Ahmed is clearly the most smart or the smartest student in the class. Smart is a very short word, one syllable. So we would want to say smartest. This is the most expensive or the expensivest solution. So most expensive because expensive has three syllables. All right, here we're going to test a couple of things. I am more familiar with this town than he or him, or more or most familiar. Since we're only talking about one other person, we're going to use more. If you were talking about I'm most familiar, or we're just talking about one person. So I'm more familiar with this town than, which would we use, he or him? It sounds right to use him, but it's actually he, because if you'll remember when we talked about pronouns before, we said if this really, when you're using than or as, it's really than he is. I am more familiar with this town than he is. So use he. All right, we want to avoid double comparisons, either double positive kind of things or double negatives. So you wouldn't say this is the most longest I've ever had to wait in line. You just say this is the longest I've ever had to wait in line. Most longest sounds like something a kid would say. Kids also tend to use double negative. Here's some examples of a double negative. He doesn't have no idea what she's talking about. So you would say he doesn't have any idea what she's talking about, or he has no idea what she's talking about. But when you say he doesn't, there's a negative, have no idea, that's a double negative, and they cancel each other out. So that's wrong. All right, let's review a little more. They don't want no trouble. So that's incorrect, that you would say they want no trouble or they don't want any trouble. You haven't heard nothing yet. That's incorrect. You'd say you haven't heard anything yet. Yesterday seemed more gloomier than today. So this is a double comparison, and you just would say yesterday seemed gloomier than today, not more gloomier. I can't hardly wait to see you. It's actually, I can hardly wait to see you, because hardly is kind of like it's a soft negative. So it's, I can hardly wait to see you. All right, here, I'd like to visit oftener, but I can't never find the time. So we testing a few things here. So like I told you, even though often is 2 syllables, you would say more often or most often. So I'd like to visit more often, but I can never find the time, or I can't ever find the time in that sentence. All right, that's all on modifiers and prepositions, and I'll see you next time.